The next step that we're going to do is pass some variables out of Flask onto a HTML page, and then we're also going to build some additional routes and build some functionality for our user to be able to navigate back and forth between these additional routes, a locations page and an image gallery. So in terms of what this will look like, back here in our Flask app, if I stop and rerun that, you'll see that I just have my home page here, but at the moment it just says hello world. Well, what I want it to do is here to say home page, and then underneath I might get it to say something like hello and a particular name. All right, we'll pass that through as a variable. So rather than hard coding it into the HTML, we're going to build it in as a variable that Python and Flask itself will then pass through. So I'm going to hit stop up here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make it so that it does not just say hello world. So if I were to come here to my home.html and scroll down to my Jumbotron, which is where I have this hello world, I want to get rid of this and I want to get it to say home page. Now when I go about hitting run and click into here, you'll see that now it says home page, whereas before it said hello world. All right, so just editing the bootstrap here. What I do want to get it to do though, here under this lead, is I want to say hello to Jimmy. Well, now if I go about hitting start, stop and rerun, and go here, it'll say hello to Jimmy. In reality, however, it would be rare for me to want to necessarily code a name such as Jimmy, or a user or someone who's just logged on, hard-coded into the HTML. What I actually want to do is pass it through as a variable. So I can do that back here under Flask. And what I can do is I can declare a variable here, and I'm going to call this one username, and I'm going to declare this as James. Right? It's gone grey because I haven't used it yet, but what I now have is this variable called James, right? Or this variable that has been assigned James, so it's a string variable. What I could do is use any functionality that I would so choose out of Python here. I could scrape this from a website, I could randomly assign it, I could do whatever I want, but for now I'm just going to leave it as a regular string. I can now pass this through as a variable to the HTML. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this variable. This is what's going to flow through to the HTML. So I might say something like the user is equal to username. And this looks confusing because it appears that I've got multiple variables here, and I actually do. The reason is that I've got this here, right, this variable that is here within Flask. Well, now I'm telling Flask that I want to pass through that variable username, and I want to make sure that the HTML knows that there is another variable that's going to be assigned called user. And when they find user, it's going to be equal to username, which is equal to James. What does this look like in practicalities? Well, if I skip back here under home, whereas previously I've got Jimmy, I can get rid of this and I want to call this variable, which was user. Now, there's obviously going to be a problem here. This is user, yes, sure, I'm passing it through, but if I leave it here within this paragraph tags, then it's just going to seem just as a bit of static text. It's actually going to say hello user, so that's not actually going to work at this stage. The way that I designate that this is going to be a variable that I want you to call is I do open and close double squiggle brackets, like so. And now when I hit save and I stop and rerun, it's now going to say James. The handy part of this is, of course, that I could make this whatever I want here. So I can make this Russell, and now when I go about hitting stop and rerun and reload it, it'll pass through Russell. And as I said before, this username could be equal to whatever I so chose. I could make it something that I've pulled from a website. I could make it something that I've randomly generated. I could use all of the functionality that's available in Python in order to determine what this variable is. For now, it's just a bit of static text, but I can now pass that variable through. I could do this with multiple variables if I chose. So I could pass through another variable here that would be his date of birth, and I could just do a comma here and pass through date of birth, and therefore I could then call on date of birth somewhere in here. I've just got to remember that I have to do it within this double squiggle bracket with the space on either side just for some readability. So now that I've managed to pass through those variables, the next stage that I'd like to do is to create some additional routes for some extra pages. It's no use me just having one home page. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an extra page here underneath home. So I'm going to right click on templates, make sure that you're clicking on the folder itself, right click templates, new HTML file, and these are going to be called, first one's going to be called locations. And this is because back in here you might note that I've got these clickable buttons up here, but as I click on them nothing changes, all right, because I haven't actually built any of the pages, there's no routes, etc., and I'm not actually routing to them. So now here if I use this locations.html, I'm going to Control A to select all of it, and hit backspace to get rid of all of them. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste everything out of this home.html so that I maintain the same view, the same look of things. So I'm going to go Control A to select everything here in home.html, Control C to copy. I'm going to click back here under locations.html and I'm going to paste it in here. Now, not especially inventive given that, hey, it's pretty much just an identical page. To differentiate it, I'm going to scroll down where it says homepage here, and I'm going to get rid of this and create and just type location. So this is within the Jumbotron. So whereas my homepage will say homepage here and hello whatever variable I'm saying, locations will just say locations page. Of course, I don't have any way to access it just yet, so I need to build a route to do that. Here under Starter, right, under my regular Flask app, I'm going to get rid of this previous route that I've built here, my index, which is a bit of a placeholder, and I'm going to build a freshie. And I'm going to start off with my route here, my decorator, and I'm going to create a route that goes to locations. I'm then going to create a function here. It's called route locations that does not accept any arguments. I'm then going to come down to my next line. And I'm going to say return render template locations.html, and you might already have picked that there's going to be a problem here when we get there. When I hit start, stop and rerun, and go to my location here, or go to my homepage rather, I can now route to locations. Of course, I've got a bit of a problem, that is that I'm not actually passing through a variable. I've copied and pasted my home.html, so it's still looking for the same variable. So I will need to do some slight editing here. So back under my locations.html, and again, just remember that they look very similar at the moment, home.html and locations.html. Well, I want to get rid of this user. So I'm going to get rid of this entire line actually and make this make a bit more sense. A list of locations that are worth traveling to. So now when I hit start, stop and rerun, I now have a locations option here. Alright, great. Now, even just initially there, I went to click on this, but of course I don't have any options available here in my navbar in order for me to get there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to need to set up something within my navbar in order to be able to do that. And for this I use something called URL4. I'm going to start off with my home page because that's where I go to initially. I'm going to come down here to my navbar and I'm going to find my locations page here. So this is an anchor tab that is within the list item, and that is this button itself here. This is a horizontal list item. And where I have href, that's hyperlink reference, I just have this hash. Well, I'm going to get rid of the hash and I'm going to go about creating a route here, or routing it to something that I've already got, that is my route locations. What I actually want it to do here when the user clicks on this is I want it to call this route, right, this function, and I want it to go to locations.html. So I want it to call this function here. The way that I can do that is within here I'm going to use a Python command, and in order to designate that I'm using a Python command I need to do my double squiggle brackets again, and I'm going to use a function here that's URL4, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to go to root locations. So some syntax that I've got here. My double squiggle brackets, one on either side. This function here, URL4, and then I have my open brackets with route locations on it. And what this is going to do is when I click on this, it's going to call this route locations, which is this part here, and it should hopefully go to that page. So let's go and see what happens. Now when I click on it, it automatically calls that. Now there is a bit of a problem here, and that is of course that I only have it available here on my home page. So it's not exactly a perfect solution just yet, but at least using this URL4 we can start to build some of our routes and some of our locations.